Hi.
Hello. We have reached Genesis chapter 30, verse 25. And this study we have entitled Trial, Terror, and Triumph. And it is a prosperity story. And from a lot of perspectives in the modern charismatic church, one of the lessons you take from it is that if you're a good guy, God will prosper you, which twists your theology completely away from the gospel of grace that we've talked about as being what we learn from Genesis. So, what about this prosperity? Is this the way God does business in the gospel age, or was this the way He did business in the age of the law and before that, when they didn't have a elaborated eschatology as to about what would happen after death or in the future? Even the resurrection was not clearly out there. So, does the text of any part of the Bible obligate us to think like the people who we're reading about thought? That seems to be the question that's left hanging over a lot of the book of Genesis, especially this part. Because when you think about it as a witness, you think that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were blessed because they were the good guys. And a lot of Christians think that way too.
Yeah.
So let's read it. And interestingly, my heading here in the ESV version is Jacob's prosperity, starting at 30 verse 25.
And it came to pass, when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said to Laban, Send me away, that I may go to my own place and to my own country, or to my country. Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know my service which I have done for you. And Laban said to him, Please stay, if I have found favor in your eyes, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake. Then he said, Name me your wages, and I will give it. So Jacob said to him, You know how I have served you, and how your livestock has been with me. For what you had before I came was little, and it has increased to a great amount. The Lord has blessed you since my coming. And now, when shall I also provide for my own house? So he said, What shall I give you? And Jacob said, You shall not give me anything. If you will do this thing for me, I will again feed and keep your flocks. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from there all the speckled and spotted sheep, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and the spotted and the speckled among the goats, and these shall be my wages. So my righteousness will answer for me in time to come, when the subject of my wages comes before you. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats, and brown among the lambs, will be considered stolen, if it is with me.
Laban said, Good, let it be as you have said. But that day Laban removed the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and put them in the charge of his sons. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob pastured the rest of Laban's flock. Then Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond and plane trees, and peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of the sticks. He set the sticks that he had peeled in front of the flocks in the troughs, that is, the watering places, where the flocks came to drink. And since they bred when they came to drink, the flocks bred in front of the sticks, and so the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob separated the lambs, and set the faces of the flocks toward the striped and all the black in the flock of Laban. And he put his own droves apart, and did not put them with Laban's flock. Whenever the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob would lay the sticks in the troughs before the eyes of the flock, that they might breed among the sticks. But for the feebler of the flock he would not lay them there. So the feebler would be Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. Thus the man increased greatly, and had large flocks, female servants, and male servants, and camels and donkeys.
Mm.
So we've said it frequently in Genesis that these chapters can be a hermeneutical minefield, meaning that your way of interpreting will be tripped up seriously, and you might be stumbled because you can't put together this way of looking at the world with what
Yeah.
you know from your scientific worldview, and
Mm-hmm.
also even your theological worldview. So how
Yeah.
does this gospel of prosperity, which is very plainly here in this text, how does it sit beside the gospel of the cross in the New Testament? So two items of the hermeneutical minefield, the interpretive problems here would be, first of all, the gospel of prosperity. It's plainly taught in the Old Testament that if you do the right thing, God will bless you.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in the New Testament, the gospel of the cross teaches that even if you do the right thing, you'll actually be persecuted and probably suffer the loss of things and maybe even your life.
Mm-hmm.
That's one problem. Then there's the problem of the science here. Are we obligated to think that we should adopt the science of Laban and
I think this science worked.
yeah?
The science of the time.
Is the Bible endorsing the science of Laban and Jacob here?
No, I don't think it is. I think if you make that assumption, that's when you're going to get stumbled up and you're going to have problems. But for me, reading this, which sounds really ridiculous and superstitious and kind of crazy, I think the reason why it turned out the way it did, where he did have the right kind of animals, the stronger ones were his, and the weaker ones were his father-in-law's, was not because this worked. It's because all along God has been blessing him. And that was what he promised. I will prosper you. I will bless you. And Laban has already said that at the beginning of what we read. That I have noticed that I'm being blessed for your sake.
Yeah.
So when he makes this new arrangement, God has listened to his plea. He's wanting something for himself now. He's worked all these years for Laban. He wants to be establishing something for his own family.
So is it
and
fair?
God blesses it. So 30. The Lord has blessed you since my coming. He recognizes it too. But he's tying it to, which kind of makes sense in the character of Jacob, I would say, because he's already a schemer.
So
That's been demonstrated before.
Is it fair to say then we're no more obligated to accept the science of Laban and Jacob and their attitudes towards how things work than we are obligated to accept the character of Jacob as being our model?
Yeah.
Or the character of Laban or anybody else in the Old Testament as being our model.
Yeah.
And that's why Jacob is one of the most ignored characters in the whole Bible, considering the amount of space he gets.
Yeah.
Half the book of Genesis.
Yeah.
You would think we'd talk about him more.
We avoid all the passages or avoid the obvious that he's not a nice character a lot of the time. Because we think, well, God is favoring him, God is blessing him, God continues the promises that he gave to Abraham through his children.
Yeah.
Then he must be a good guy. So I have to justify everything he does.
And a lot of Christians as well as Jehovah's Witnesses think that way.
Yeah, yeah.
That they ignore the bad stuff and want to think that Jacob's faithfulness is somehow being rewarded in all this.
Yeah.
I don't think that's on the surface of the text very often.
No.
Sometimes it is, occasionally, I would say. That Jacob was doing things for the right reason.
Yeah. But it was usually later in his life he starts to really learn that lesson.
So this is all God's condescension. And I have to take that attitude towards modern Christians too, because it's not like this worldview, even this scientific worldview has died.
No.
Here we are 4,000 years later, and the prosperity gospel, which is a charismatic phenomenon, is endorsed by, well, it's endorsed by a lot of pastors, but it's practiced by tens of millions, maybe even as many as 100 or 200 million people in the world right now, who believe that God prospers you if you do the right thing. It's certainly not a New Testament teaching. Prospers you physically, that is.
Yeah. And even the idea of positive thinking or negative thinking influencing you.
Yeah.
that is in some Christian circles.
You had a little incident, as I recall, that indicated this is alive and well and living in 50 million
Yeah,
minds.
I couldn't believe it, really. And in our time, somebody would think this way, but when I was working at World Vision at the time, and so there was mostly Christians around me, this one Christian woman was encouraging me to look at pictures of beautiful babies because I was pregnant with Max. And I thought, what? What for? Like she said, and if you said anything negative about the pregnancy, she was all alarmed and like, well, don't do that. If you say anything about this, it's going to happen to you. It was very strange thinking, I thought. But she thought if I looked at pictures of beautiful babies, I'd have a beautiful baby. And I thought, my goodness, doesn't it have more to do with the genes in my family? Like if my parents are beautiful or my grandparents?
So safe to say then her theology, prosperity, was actually bending her science in the direction of what we see here in Jacob and Laban. Yeah. Here's what Campbell Morgan and Barnhouse and Kidner have to say about all of this. You have Morgan, right?
Right. Campbell Morgan says the procedure is not admirable on either side, but watching the movement as between two schemers. So this is the arrangement between Laban and Jacob. It is impossible to avoid a feeling of satisfaction that Jacob was one too many for Laban. Comparing Jacob through all this history with Abraham it is perfectly clear that the faith of the former moved on a much lower level than that of the latter. Abraham, for instance, had been content to let the scheming Lot choose, to give him all the advantage. Jacob always believed in God, was yet not willing to commit these matters of worldly possession to him.
So yeah, Morgan's quite right. You get the general impression just from a surface reading of Genesis that Jacob is not Abraham.
Yeah, he's always got little insurance policies in there. Yes, I believe in God, but just in case, I'll make this deal.
So it's interesting that Abraham is called the father of all those having faith. Jacob is certainly never that.
Yeah,
And
well,
then
he has faith, but on a lower level, like he says.
Yeah, and faith does occur on higher and lower levels. Give us more faith, the disciples say.
Right.
And now, specifically as to their scientific insight, Barnhouse says unbelievers have challenged the Bible's accuracy because there is no scientific evidence for such prenatal influence. But the Bible does not teach prenatal influence on animals. It merely records that Jacob believed it, and apparently Laban did too. Derek Kidner says, in displaying the striped rods at breeding time, he acted on the common belief, so it was wider than this family, that a vivid sight during pregnancy or conception would leave its mark on the embryo. But this is apparently quite unfounded. No doubt some of his success came from selective breeding, but by itself this would not have worked. This would have worked very slowly, as Laban reckoned it would. Clearly God intervened to fulfill the hopes of Jacob placed in the rods, using them as he used the arrows of Joash or the bones of Elisha as the means or the occasions of working miraculously. Here Kidner is alluding to stories in Kings where you have something that seems quite strange on the surface.
Yeah.
For instance, a dead soldier being thrown into a cave where the bones of Elisha are. And somehow, is it the bones of Elisha that gave life to this soldier? Or is it God working through the beliefs of that time? Condescending again, right? So God is no more endorsing Laban and Jacob's science than he's endorsing their scheming and their characters. We wanted to put in a link to Ecclesiastes, right?
Yes.
Because Ecclesiastes is a hermeneutical minefield, and no one uses it more. What can we say? No one uses it more disastrously than the Watchtower.
Yeah.
Because what they don't notice is that Ecclesiastes is never quoted in the New Testament. What do they know, therefore, that Jehovah's Witnesses don't know? But you can't use it as a system of dogma for anything.
Yeah. Because they have the method of believing things through a system of proof texting.
Yeah.
They will run into this problem in lots of places in Scripture.
Oh, yeah. No more disastrously, though, in the way they treat Ecclesiastes 9, verses 5 and 10. You know, the passage where it says the living are conscious that they will die, but the dead know nothing. What do they find there? This is one of usually their first proof text when it comes to life after death. The dead know nothing. So what's the problem with that? Well, like we said, it's not just that one problem. If you treat Ecclesiastes as God talking, you run into a whole bunch of problems that we get into in this first video, which is first of several videos on Ecclesiastes. And it's explicitly on that proof text on life after death.
Right.
Never quoted once in the New Testament. I'm talking about the book of Ecclesiastes. So I never knew that until I checked it out in the Watchtower's own concordance.
Yeah.
So we'll see you soon.
Yeah. Bye.